Opening slide graphic text title. Session 1, Employment Support, Its Purpose and Evolution. Part 2, Employment and the Impact of Social Devaluation with Milton Tyree. Logos, Belonging Matters, and talksthatmatter.net.
So this is going to be kind of a snapshot look, but it's important to define the term and what it means here. This is not about people's inherent worth, but their perceived worth. It is based on judgment, not on fact. It's based on a difference that people have, a difference that's perceived in a negative way. So we have all kinds of people we exalt that have a difference because they're seen in a very positive way. Devaluation happens when there's a difference that's perceived in a negative way. And there are two kinds. There's the individual devaluation. One of the more difficult parts of our human identity is that we all will devalue other people. We can become more conscious of it, but we will all do it. But the really harmful part, and what we're looking at here, is what we call collective devaluation. And that is when a society, or most people in a society, decide that that particular attribute, that difference that's seen in a negative way, is really widespread. So you can think about who are the people devalued in Australia and what is the difference that they have and how that is perceived by lots of people. Maybe not anybody in this room, but by lots of people in a negative way. And disability certainly falls into that realm, doesn't it? That's why when I had a chance to study social role valorization theory when I was about 10 years into the work of finding jobs for people, I thought, aha, that's the problem. It's not that people can't work. It's not that there aren't jobs out there that people would like to do. It's the pushback. It's social devaluation. So coming to terms with that is really important in our work. It's universal. Even very kind, enlightened, highly principled people devalue other people. Even people who experience devaluation devalue other people. Even family members and friends of people who experience devaluation devalue people. My first stop in Australia was Canberra, and I was having a late dinner in the bar one night, and this was on the TV screen. And so this was interesting to me. It was a report after 4 years of a Royal Commission studying disability and its impact. I don't know who this woman is. I didn't catch her name. But she was talking, sure enough, about patterns in the disability world, patterns of segregation, poverty, poor education, low employment. And so I'm hopeful. I don't know about this commission. I'm hopeful it's something that can be helpful to y'all, because I know it wouldn't take, that some of those 4 years was figuring out what else to do, and that they consulted with people like the people in this room to do that. It wouldn't take 4 years to find social devaluation, would it? It's pretty up front. So what I'm going to do now is just show a few expressions of this, and we can think about how they relate to employment. And so what's hopeful about SRV is it names the pushback, but it also gives us principles and themes to think about what to do instead. So this is one of the first ones. And it is that the socially devalued characteristic comes to define people's lives, in this instance, disability. So this is what we mean by that. Just having a disability, even the name of certain disabilities, all kinds of decisions can be made about people without even meeting the person. Like, where are you going to go to school? Who your classmate's going to be? Where are you going to live? Who are you going to live with? Where are you going to work? Are you going to work? Disability being life-defining. You see, this one aspect of people's lives defining what their lives look like. And so I visited a hotel company about 5 years ago. This gets back to the idea of there being really positive aspects and things that need some work. the really positive aspects of this hotel company were that they had a strong commitment to hire people with disabilities, saying, we know people with disabilities can contribute, they're part of our community, they need to be involved in the work of our hotel. What was really interesting to me about this was that people were assigned to jobs based on their disability. If you had Down syndrome, you worked in food service. If you had autism, you worked in housekeeping. If you were deaf, you did like room service, taking items to people's rooms, their luggage and things like that. And I thought, that was really astounding, you know. But it's an example of, you see, a really good idea in terms of hiring people with disability, but the perversion of that with just nailing what one of the biggest problems was, people being, you know, all kinds of decisions being made about people and for people based on the name of their disability. I'm going to show you an excerpt from a video clip now. This is by a Nigerian author, Chimamanda Adichie. And I would encourage you to watch the longer TED Talk at some point. You can just Google or put in TED Talk, Danger of a Single Story. We're going to watch about 10 minutes of it. Now, she talks about social devaluation, and she talks about it in terms of the danger of a single story, which I think is just brilliant, and that's why I want to play this. She doesn't talk about disability, but I'm going to play this, and I'd like you at your tables to think about it. And when it's over, both remotely and in your rooms, I'm going to give you some questions to think about related to this clip.
I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story.
She felt sorry for me before she even saw me. This was her roommate in college. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of a connection as human equals. And we could replace disability for African here, couldn't we, in terms of what happens with so many people. So I don't need to do some kind of study at the University of Kentucky to find out if people with intellectual disabilities want to work, want to contribute. They do. It's up to us to figure out what that looks like. So this is all well and good until we understand what collides with people getting valued social roles, and it's what Dr. Wolfensberger called social devaluation. All right, one expression of the danger of the single story, in my experience, has been sheltered workshops. Now, this is not a picture of the sheltered workshop where I worked, inside or outside, but for all the world, it could be. And I want to talk about a person whom I met along the way. Her name is Jean. And Jean graduated from a Catholic high school in 1968. And she had cerebral palsy. Guess where she went to work? The sheltered workshop. See, this is a really powerful example of disability being life-defining. The single story about Jean was she had cerebral palsy without any attention to what she was good at doing, interested in doing, what she was thinking about for a career. You have cerebral palsy, therefore, you will go work at the sheltered workshop. She worked there for 15 years. And I'm going to show you that didn't last after 15 years, but I had the opportunity to interview Jean a number of years back, and I've known her for decades. And I just asked her about that period of her life, those 15 years. I said, how was that? How did that settle with you, Jean? And she said this. She said, I thought I was sunk. I thought I was doomed. She didn't see any way that there'd be anything different. And she knew the only reason she was there, the only thing she had in common with anybody else there, was that she had a disability like other people did there. So Jean did. She was one of the first people to leave a sheltered workshop that we got to work with at Community Employment. And Sandy, one of our job support people, so Sandy was her job support person, and she assisted her to get a clerical job at the University of Louisville. And this was what I referenced as a carved job yesterday. It took carved off part of the responsibilities of clerical people. Jean's speech could be a bit difficult to understand unless you knew her, so she didn't want to be answering phones, but there were other clerical jobs that were carved out for her to do at the University of Louisville. This was her first job. She left that to take a better job at Edgecombe Metals, a full-time job there. She was part-time at the university. Edgecombe Metals moved to another country, and she worked at the Jefferson County Clerk's office for 25 years performing clerical work. Jean was one of these people who hated three-day weekends. You all have long holiday weekends, don't you? You like have Friday off or Monday off. She hated that because really her people were at work, especially the last job she had for 25 years, the Jefferson County clerk's office. And so she go, oh gosh, we've got Monday off, and she retired at age 69, which was early retirement for her because she'd wanted to work until she was 80. And the only reason she retired was just increased impact of her disability and a number of life changes because of that. She had to retire. But she was a real illustration of a lifetime of work, you see, that could have been lost, for her and everybody that she got to meet along the way, if disability had continued to be life-defining for her.
Graphic text, watch next. Session 1, Part 3, Employment and the Impact of Negative Roles Imposed by Others. Closing slide, graphic text. With thanks to Milton Tyree, Mark Gold & Associates, www.markgold.com, livestream, www.beinteractive.com.au. This video was made possible with the support of an Information and Capacity Building grant through the Department of Social Services, produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change and our materials for reference only. This video was filmed on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Logos Belonging Matters and TalksThatMatter.net.